And they continued steadfastly in the apostles' doctrine and fellowship, and in breaking of bread, and in prayers. A deep sense of awe came over them all, and the apostles performed many miraculous signs and wonders. And all that believed were together, and had all things common. They worshiped together at the temple each day, met in homes for the Lord's Supper, and shared their meals with great joy and generosity.
Well, good morning, NorthPoint. Good to see each of you this morning, those of you that are here and those of you that might be watching online as well. Hey, what a great Sunday, last Sunday, the weekend, huh? Not only, we can clap for that. Like I always joke, I know we're Midwesterners, but we're allowed to clap a little bit. So Good Friday service just reflecting on that grief, that sorrow of Jesus' death, and then the joy, like of Easter Sunday morning and the celebration, not only thinking about Jesus' resurrection, but what the resurrection means for right now. Like we get to live in resurrection life now and the future that is waiting for us in heaven better than we can even imagine. I know that you guys enjoyed Easter weekend because you pounded 1,000 Lamy pastries last Sunday. 1,000 of them. I'm proud of you guys. I'm proud of you. Maybe because I told you that Easter Sunday calories don't count, and so you're like, I'm going to take you up on that. I'm just going to have 7. So you did. Maybe we'll try to break that record next year. I don't know, but I do want to say thank you to just lots of people. You for being here. If you were a part of last Sunday, thanks for being here or watching. And then it just takes lots of people to do that, right? So our band and worship team and tech team and greeters, we have people out in the parking lot, people taking care of kids in a nursery, and just all different people involved. So thank you for your engagement in that. So today, we're going to continue to celebrate and focus on Jesus, but back in the book of Acts. So if you've got a Bible, or grab that one in front of you, it's on page 889. So Disney called, and they're like, we need our tree back. So we're done with the tree series, right? That like was a cool tree. People that did that was awesome. So we're done with that. We're back to Acts, where we've been looking at our origin story. And what we've been saying about Acts is it tells us where followers of Jesus come from and what Jesus wants for his church. And by looking at the way that this all got started, we can learn some things about what Jesus has for us today. And one of the things that we've noticed as we've looked at our origin story is that there are a lot of exciting, thrilling, really cool things that are happening, but there's also some not so good things that are happening as well. There's some difficulties, there's struggles, there's some issues that the early church had to deal with. And in this way, the early church is not too unlike your family. Right? Your family is like this. Like I imagine if you look back on your family history, you're like, hey, there's things I love, I appreciate, I'm thankful for, some good memories, some good relationships. And then there probably also is in your family some level of dysfunction. Let's just say it, right? Every family has some level of dysfunction. And some of those things are small, and some of those things are a little bit bigger. Let me share a couple bigger ones with you. I know, for instance, of some people that grew into their adult life only to find out when they were like 60 years old that their father is not actually their father. Like the guy they thought was their biological father is not their actual father. Some of you that are here maybe found out that you have siblings that you never knew about well into your adulthood. If we ask you to share your family stories, a number of you would have Dateline stories, right? You know those crazy Dateline stories? Murder for hire plots that include like a cruise ship and somebody falling off in diamonds and a flight to Panama and stuff like that. Like you have some of those stories in your family. And what I want to tell you today is that the church is not exempt from crazy things like this happening, in part because the people that make up families are the people that make up the church, right? And sometimes those are the people that are actually leading the church. And so maybe over the last decade or so, you followed some of the not so fun, not so good Christian scandals that have taken place, like with Bill Hybels and Willow Creek Church, or Mark Driscoll, or Ravi Zacharias, or more recent memory, Hillsong Church. Sometimes those things are sort of out there with people maybe we've looked at, we've seen, we've admired, but they have some distance from us. And then sometimes those things hit a lot closer to home within our local community, within the Des Moines metro area, or even within our own church. Now, when these kinds of things happen, there is a tendency for us, on one hand, to maybe ignore it or to deny that it happens, right? Brush it under the rug, don't discuss it, don't talk about it. Some of you maybe grew up in a church culture and environment where you were told, like, you never talk bad about leaders in any way. We're just going to ignore. This never even happened. We cannot discuss it, right? And in the process, then, you end up not really dealing with your emotions and feelings. You end up not really dealing with the pain that it's caused to a lot of people by just brushing it under the rug. That's one approach. On the other hand, sometimes we go to the opposite extreme and we over-talk about it. That's the only thing we can talk about it. We share it with people who have nothing to do with it. We're processing it. We often fill in our own details. We assign motives to people. We think we know what's going on, or we postulate about what happened. Or maybe this, we keep producing podcast episode after podcast episode over one leader's failures because it's generating revenue and income for our organization, right? And so we end up gossiping and spreading rumors in the process of that. Sometimes we do that on this second one without a lot of self-examination. It's easy to be a judge and a critic, right? But to never really look into our own hearts. And so what we want to try to do is we've got to avoid this brushing it under the rug, not addressing it, not dealing with it. Real wrongs happen, and they need to be addressed and talked about. And on the other hand, we don't want to fall into this gossip, over-talking, becoming bitter category either. How do we carve a path between those two extremes? Because maybe you've heard about these Christian celebrities, and maybe you haven't. Maybe you care about that, maybe you don't care about that. But here's something I do know, that you all have leaders in your life. That everyone that is here has people that you look up to, people that you respect, people that you want to follow, people that you emulate. You have a coach, you have mentors, you have parents, you have a boss, you have a spiritual leader in your life that you look up to. And if you've lived your life for very long, some of them will fail. Some of them will mess up. Some of them will fall hard. They will completely tank. Others will say one thing and do something else. And at the least, I know this, that there's going to be leaders in your life that will disappoint you. They won't do something. They won't say something. They won't give you attention, or they won't live up to your expectations. You will be disappointed. So what do you do? How do you handle it when someone you look up to fails you? I want us to think about this today by going back to our origin story in the book of Acts and comparing two Simons. So I'm kind of calling this a tale of two Simons. Now, you may know one of these Simons pretty well. His name is Simon Peter. Simon Peter, one of the early followers of Jesus. He was one of Jesus' apostles, and he's like the main spokesman, the primary leader for the group of Jesus' followers. Peter is the guy that on the day of Pentecost in Acts chapter 2 preached the first Christian message, and get this, 3,000 people responded, and they came forward and like, we want to follow Jesus. That's a pretty effective message on that day. Peter, over time, is growing in influence. He's growing in popularity. People are following him. They're watching him. They're looking to Peter for leadership, and his following is really, really growing. We could say this. His TikToks are exploding, right? His Instagram followers are like off the charts. His YouTube subscribers, he's got a reality show. All of this social media influences upon Peter. And you might say, Jeremy, like, really? You're kind of exaggerating a little bit. It certainly wasn't like that in the early church. And for sure, they didn't have social media in the early church, but popularity and celebrity status have always been around since the beginning of time. And it certainly was there in the early church, and Peter had it. If you don't believe me, check out this story in Acts chapter 5. In Acts chapter 5, we read this. The apostles performed many signs and wonders among the people. They were highly regarded by the people. More and more men and women believed in the Lord and were added to their number. So in other words, they're highly regarded by the people at large in the town and in the community. Not just people that were following Jesus, but by everybody. And then many more among that big number of people that are following the apostles. Some of them come to believe in Jesus. As a result, people brought the sick into the streets, laid them on beds and mats, get this, so that at least Peter's shadow might fall on some of them as he passed by. If that's not popularity, I don't know what popularity is, right? Crowds gathered also from towns around Jerusalem, bringing their sick and those tormented by impure spirits, and all of them were healed. People are coming from outside of Jerusalem to see the apostles and to get in Peter's shadow. Now look at it. If people are following you around trying to get in your shadow, that is next level. Like you've made it to a different tier, right? And that's what Peter's got. Peter is like, he's got like early paparazzi following him around. And Peter, he had to start feeling a little bit like Justin Bieber at Coachella, right? Like, you don't really probably understand what that is, right? Most of you. It's like Joe in the foyer on Sunday, right? Everybody just want to be around him, get a little taste of Joe, like see him, touch the golden hands and the golden voice, just be around it, right? Like you just want to be around that. All eyes, in other words, for Peter, all eyes are on him. People are trying to get a glimpse of him. And Peter had to be feeling this. Then the story goes on to tell us that Peter and John get arrested by the religious authorities. They're put in jail. But the religious authorities, they can't do much to Peter and John because they fear the people, because they're so popular. Then later on in Acts chapter 8, the chapter that we're in now, a big persecution breaks out where all of the Christians are being persecuted, they're being put in jail, they're being beaten, they're being tormented. And so the Christians have to leave Jerusalem, but guess who gets to stay? Peter and John and the other apostles. Why do you think they got to stay? Because their status protected them, and they're able to stay there. Look, Peter is like the first Christian celebrity. And if we were making a little list of all these things that Peter has going on, here's what we would say. Peter's got influence, he has power, he has popularity, and he is looked up to by a great crowd of people. That's our first Simon, Simon Peter. The second Simon we want to look at is Simon Cowell from AGT. No, I'm just kidding. It's not that Simon. See if he's still awake. The second Simon is in Acts chapter 8, and his name is Simon Magus, or Simon the magician, the sorcerer. And he's maybe a little bit less well known to us, but not among the people where he lived in Samaria. Acts chapter 8 and verse 9 says this. It says, "Now for some time a man named Simon had practiced sorcery in the city, and he amazed all the people of Samaria. He boasted that he was someone great, and all the people, both high and low, gave him their attention and exclaimed, 'This man is rightly called the great power of God.' They followed him because he amazed them for a long time with his sorcery." That looks a bit like Simon Peter, doesn't it? I mean, you get at least similar kinds of things are going on there. And so if we made Simon Magus's list, it actually would look much like what Simon Peter had going on. Influence, power, popularity, fame, influence. It says that he amazed the people gave him their attention, the people followed him. Two Simons, lots of similarities, at least in terms of influence, power, popularity, and people looking up to you. Now look, I want to say this. One thing that we have to observe from this is simply that this is going to happen. You're going to want to have people to look up to. It's in you to look up to other people, right? It's in us to have people that we admire. And if that's the case, that means there's always going to be fame and popularity. There are going to be certain people within our society that are going to be popular. That happens in the world, and that happens in the church. Inside the church, outside the church, it's going to be true. It happens with artists, it happens with musicians, it happens with athletes, it happens with celebrities, and it happens maybe with spiritual leaders and pastors and authors and people that have that kind of position over us. It's going to happen. In fact, when all of this is happening to Simon Peter, God never says anything about it being wrong and that God doesn't want it to happen, right? You never get this verse that says, "And Peter was supposed to stop going out in public so that he wouldn't cast a shadow during daytime hours and people would follow his shadow around." It doesn't condemn that at all. It just acknowledges that this happens. So we never read that influence is wrong. We never read that power or popularity is wrong. But then, of course, we have to ask another question. But is there any danger in it? Is there anything there that we should watch out for? And I think we could begin to answer that by seeing a key difference between the two Simons. All of this that we're seeing is the same, but what is different? And the difference has everything to do with what these two men did with the influence, the power, and the popularity. Check out Simon Magus, where we get a little bit of clue what's going on with him in verse 9. It says, he boasted that he was someone great. And it goes on to say the people looked at him and said, he is the great power of God. Who was Simon Magus in it for? Who was he pointing to? What was he all about? He was in it for himself. It was about Simon Magus. The popularity, the fame, the influence, which probably gave him great wealth, was about him. So that when the apostles came to town that he was in, including Peter, and God begins to work through them with great power, Simon attaches himself to them, and then he says this to them in verse 18. Check it out. It says, when Simon saw that the Spirit was given at the laying on of the apostles' hands, he offered them money. And he said, give me also this ability so that everyone on whom I lay my hands may receive the Holy Spirit. He says, I'll buy that power. Let me have that influence. Do you know we have a term that comes down to us 2,000 years later from this account in the Bible? It's called simony. Simony means the buying and selling of religious privileges, and it comes from this account. So that when the apostles come and he sees the power they have, Simon says, let me buy it. Let me have that influence. That's exactly what Simon Magus wants, because he doesn't really care about people. He cares about himself. He cares about power. He cares about influence. Now, how will Simon Peter respond to this request from Simon Magus? Now, you might say in your mind, okay, I kind of know the Bible. I probably know Simon Peter a little bit, like he's going to reject it. He's going to say no. but I want you to think for a second about how tempting this might have been to Simon Peter. I mean, Simon Peter has a lot of popularity in his own right. He's got a lot of power. He's got a lot of influence. I mean, people are following his shadow around. And when I think about people following Simon Peter's shadow around, I think about like professional athletes or NBA players. When they get done a professional game and they're all sweaty and nasty and they start taking their sweatbands and their sleeves off and their jerseys and they throw them into the crowd and then people are like fawning over them like, oh! Like, I don't know if they do that or not, but it's like Steph Curry's sweat, LeBron's perspiration. This is amazing. I'm going to hang it up. I'm never going to wash it. I'm going to hang it up in my house. Like, people do that kind of crazy stuff. So Peter's got that going on, and yet in the midst of all of that fame and attention, he's probably not very wealthy. So the wealthiest guy in town comes to you and says, hey, I can make you rich off of this if you'll let me in on what you got going on there. Maybe we can partner up together. Think about how much power and influence we could have as a team. All these people have been following me. I can be your in to get influence with them if you just let me get in on what's going on here. And Peter may have bitten if he was in it for himself. But notice how he responds in verse 20. Peter answered, may your money perish with you because you thought you could buy the gift of God with money. You have no part or share in this ministry because your heart is not right before God. Repent of this wickedness and pray to the Lord in the hope that he may forgive you for having such a thought in your heart. I see that you are full of bitterness and you're captive to sin. Peter's having none of it, right? I mean, he just calls the dude out with very strong language. He basically is like, you're captive to sin, you're selfish, you're about yourself, you're a bitter person, you're probably jealous of what God is doing here, and you're sad that you don't have the influence you used to have, you're trying to gain it back. It's all wrong because you're all about yourself. But for Simon Peter, what was he all about? Well, we got a clue to what Simon Peter is all about there, but we get more of a clue in verse 25 when it says this, after they, the apostles, further proclaimed the word of the Lord and testified about whom? Jesus. Who is Simon Magus about? I'm the great power of God. Follow me. I'm going to amaze you with what I do. What does Simon Peter do? He says, no, this is about Jesus. He testifies about Jesus, preaching the gospel in many Samaritan villages all the way back to Jerusalem. He stops off at every town and says, look, Jesus Christ lived, died, and resurrected. He's the Messiah. He's the Savior you need. He's the King of the world. Believe in him. Come into his family. But Peter, you're healing people. You're a pretty good dude in your own right. Let's not talk about me. This isn't about me. God's just using me. This is about Jesus and what he is doing. And Peter was for Jesus. He pointed to Jesus. He was about Jesus. And I think Peter was all about Jesus because he knew at the end of the day that he is a pretty poor substitute for the God of the universe, meaning Peter is. He knew at the end of the day that, like, look, God gave him this position. God gave him this opportunity. In fact, he probably remembered back into his mind where on the night that Jesus was betrayed and was about to be put on the cross, Peter said, I don't know that blankety blank Jesus. Forget it. No, I have no idea who he is, right? And then after the resurrection, Jesus meets Peter on a seashore over breakfast that he had cooked for Peter. And he says, Peter, do you love me? Then feed my sheep. Lead my people. He forgave Peter. He called him back into his inner circle. And he even gave him the opportunity to be the primary leader of his apostles. And so Peter knows this. He knows that Jesus forgives. Jesus is the gracious one. He is the King. He gives me the air that I breathe. He gives me the food that I eat. And he gives me the opportunity to be a part of what he is doing. And so Peter says, you're going to be very disappointed if I point you to myself. You need to look to Jesus. Now, what does all of this have to do with when leaders fail? Right? You might be like, okay, Jeremy, I thought we were talking about when leaders fail. You're talking about these two Simons. Like, what's the connect between these things? How do you handle it when people you look up to disappoint you or hurt you or screw up? What do you do when leaders turn out to be a little bit more like Simon Magus than Simon Peter? Because we don't want to ignore it or deny it, right? That doesn't do anybody any good, and it certainly doesn't do you good to just get bitter or angry or upset in your own heart, but not really deal with the reality of what's happened. And it's not right for us to over-talk about it, to just stay stuck on it and never get over it, and just continue to communicate with other people about it. So what do we do? Well, I think the Simons show us two things that will help us when people fail us, when people disappoint us. And the two things that I want to give to you today as application for this, I hope will be both preventative and restorative. And what I mean by that is that they would be preventive, like on the front end of things, as you're deciding who to follow, that you would be careful about that. They will prepare you for that. And I think they can even help you a little bit when you do go through disappointment with somebody, help you to heal a little bit more quickly. And on the other hand, I hope they'll also be restorative. They'll help you heal when it does happen. So what can we learn from the two Simons when leaders fail us? The first application is this: be careful who you look up to. The Simons show us that we need to be careful who we look up to. Now, we all have people in our lives that we have to follow, right? When you just think about people in your life, there's some authorities that are over you, some people that you need to follow, right? Bosses, parents, there's even spiritual leaders in our lives, coaches, people that we have to follow, people with influence over us. But I think you know that there is a difference between following someone and looking up to them. There's a difference between having to follow someone and even following someone well versus seeking to emulate them, wanting to be like them, and allowing them significant influence over your life. So again, there are people you have to follow. You get to choose who you look up to. There's people you have to follow, but you do get to choose who you look up to in your life. So my encouragement to you is to choose wisely, that you would consider this. If we look at the two Simons, that as you look at people, you would consider who is all about their self. Who's in it for themselves? Who's in it for what they gain? And who's in it for something else, for someone else? And when it comes to spiritual leaders, for people that are in it for Jesus and pointing us towards him. And you might say, okay, well, how do I know? Like, what's the difference between like a self-focused leader versus a Jesus-focused leader? So let's talk about that. Let's just get a little list here. What might a self-focused leader look like? Well, they would look like Simon and all the things you see in Simon, but again, let's make a little list. The first thing self-focused leaders are about is that they're into image management. Simon boasted that he was the great power of God, and he convinced everybody that he was, because he was about self-promotion. He tried to curate a particular persona, and whether he had some demonic power helping him to do amazing things or he was a trickster, somehow he got people to think that he was great, and he was very concerned with what his image was towards people. How does it make me look? What do people think about me? If you're ever around somebody and you have some leaders and some people that you have to follow, do you ever just get the sense from them that they're really, really about their appearance? They're really concerned about what other people think of them. They're really concerned about their brand, and they get kind of paranoid about what other people think, always trying to prove themselves, overly sensitive to criticism, and always just have to be in control of everything that's going on around them and what people think, their perceptions. I remember one time I was interviewing for a job, and I got down to the end, and it looked like the job was going to happen. And I remember talking with the leader who would be over me. And at the very end of our time together, he said, "Okay, now this is the most important thing I have to know. Are you going to be loyal to me?" And I was young at the time, but I heard that question. And I was like, even at that time, I was like, how? I mean, if you're not a serial killer, I think I probably will be, but I don't know that for sure at this point. I think so. My sense is that you're a good leader and it's going to be good and I can follow you, but I'm not just going to do anything you say. And even as a young 20-some-year-old guy, I just felt like that's a little bit weird, to demand loyalty from people. And it was a little sign to me that something was just a little off there, that this image and who I am and protecting and controlling everything about all of these circumstances was just a little bit off. And that's what self-focused leaders do. They're really into image management. The second thing you might see in a self-focused leader is that they use you to build their self. They're transactional in their leadership. And they only use people and are around people that benefit them in some way, even if subtly it's like a mutual giving to each other, right? They use you. Simon attaches himself to Philip, and then he's going to attach himself to the apostles because he has something to gain from them. And self-focused leaders are transactional. They use you. They don't really care about you. They use you to build themselves. A third thing you'd see in self-focused leaders is that they use guilt and manipulation. Simon tries to bribe Peter and then manipulate the Holy Spirit for his own gain. And self-focused leaders, they may be very, very subtle about the way they do this, but they use wrong motivations on people. They maybe make you feel bad, or they use a position that they have to get you to do certain things for them, making you feel bad if you don't do that. They might use your admiration to get things from you, or play on your sense of duty. Spiritual leaders might use their position to make you feel like if you say no to them, you're saying no to God. and they use a form of spiritual manipulation to get you to do what they want you to do. And if you're in a situation like that where there's a spiritual leader you look up to, and they're trying to get you to do something, you sense this isn't quite right, it can be very, very hard to discern how wrong it is, or that it even is wrong. Because you look at them and you're like, well, like you're kind of like speaking for God here. Like you're representing God. How do I know if that's right or wrong? It doesn't seem right, but it must be right because you're a spiritual leader. It can get very, very deceptive and tricky. And I would tell you, if in your heart, you think back in your history, you think back in your current situation, and you're like, I think I've had an experience like that just is off and wrong, that's probably something that you need to think about a little more. You need to deal with, maybe talk with someone about. Because self-focused leaders use guilt and manipulation on people. And a fourth thing is this: self-focused leaders lack accountability. I think at the end of the day, self-focused leaders, they don't really submit to anyone. They don't really submit to anyone. Simon is at the top of society, and it appears he has no one to push back on him until he makes this request of Simon Peter, and then Simon Peter lays the hammer down on him, which I don't think Simon Magus was used to that happening. And self-focused leaders avoid accountability. They don't really follow anyone. They're a lone ranger. And lone rangers can be exciting. They can be passionate. I mean, we kind of like maverick leaders that buck the system, that go against the way, that say things other people won't say. And sometimes our heart can be drawn to those leaders. But if they're a complete maverick and a lone ranger, they're not submitting to anybody, it is a recipe for disaster. It's going to end in failure, and it's going to screw up a lot of people because they have no one to tell them when they're being an idiot and when they're off track. I mean, this is why you got to get married, right? Or get a really close best friend who can look you in the eye and say, you're being an idiot right now. Marriage and close friends keep us from being idiots for our entire lives. I mean, you're born an idiot, you're going to be an idiot for a while, but you need people in your life to tell you, you're off, this is messed up. Why are you doing that? Why are you treating people that way? You can't say that kind of thing. That was rude. Stuff like that, right? We need that in our lives. Be wary of lone ranger leaders. Now, there's a lot more that we could probably add to this list. You're maybe mentally making a list in your own mind and you think about your experiences. But you can get a sense here of what to avoid. Even if you have to follow a leader like this, and all of us at some times in our lives, you're going to have to follow leaders that have these things going on for sure. You don't have to look up to them. You don't have to emulate them. Give them the appropriate respect, but you don't have to look up to them. And if they are abusive in any way, you don't have to follow them at all. That's something you need to talk with someone about and get help for. Now, if you are a leader, and most of you that are here, you're a leader in some right. If you are a leader, this list can also be helpful for a little bit of self-reflection, right? To step back, and we always have to do this. I mean, sometimes when leaders fail and people fail us, it's easy to put all the attention on them and criticize them and talk about them, but there has to be, and you got to do that, but there has to be a part of the process that looks inward and says, am I guilty of these things too? What have I contributed to this? So leaders, we can use this list to do a little bit of a check for us and recognize as you do that you do probably struggle with these things. You look at this list, and it doesn't mean if you're a really good leader, you don't struggle with these things. These things aren't in your heart to some degree. Every leader will struggle with these to some degree. But the point is, what do you do with it? Do you actually struggle against it and push back on it? I mean, Peter had all of these things going on in his life. Read the gospel account of Peter's life. He could check all of these boxes pretty well, right? You could make a profile of this. So there's going to be struggle as a leader. But what do you do with it? Do you act on it? Do you let it take over your heart? Do you avoid people? Do you avoid relationships? Do you not submit to anybody else? Or do you seek to yield these things to Jesus? Look, no one is perfect. No leader is always on. But what would a Jesus-focused leader look like? Or at least be making progress towards? So let's talk about the Jesus-focused leader. That's enough negative stuff, right? Let's get some positive things here. What would that look like? Well, for the Jesus-focused leader first, I think you would notice an increasing alignment between Jesus' character and their character. There's got to be some level of, I think Jesus would act like that. I think Jesus would talk like that. I think Jesus would say that. And over time, there's just this increasing alignment between what Jesus and who Jesus is and what the leader looks like. One of the best ways to describe who Jesus is from John chapter 1, and this is where we get our mission statement as a church. Jesus is, when we see him, he is filled with grace and truth. That's the character of Jesus. Compassion and conviction, grace and truth, empathy for people, love for people, listening to people, having genuine concern for people, and a kindness towards them, along with passion, conviction, truth, and what is right. We see that in Peter's life here in the Gospel of Acts, right? He's preaching and teaching the life, death, resurrection of Jesus, and you need to follow him. You need him as your Savior. There's no other name by which we must be saved. It's the only way to a relationship with God, and I would plead with you to come and receive his grace and forgiveness, right? And he heals people, and he cares for the needs of people. And he's not just preaching the message of Jesus, he's healing their physical sicknesses and needs that they have. And so in leaders, we should see this increasing alignment between Jesus' character and theirs. Secondly, I think you would see a humility that deflects attention. This one's maybe not simple to implement, but it's simple to explain. When everybody looks at Peter for healing the lame man, Peter says, I didn't do that. Jesus did that. He deflects attention away in genuine humility. And true leaders will have a humility that they mean. It's a genuine humility that comes out of a sense of gratitude for God giving them an opportunity to serve and to lead other people, a humility that deflects attention. Thirdly, there's a genuine love for Jesus. I think you sense from a leader, this isn't just a job, this isn't just a transaction, this isn't just something they have to do, but they're people that I think realize the love of God for them, that they're a child of God because of the grace of Jesus, and they live in a genuine relationship with Jesus. Not a perfect relationship, not always on, not always getting it right, but there's a sense of, God, I need you. Guide me and direct me and help me to love other people. And you sense they're being filled with the love of Jesus that is coming out for others. I think a genuine love for Jesus also looks like this. It results in leaders that are less concerned about their image and their brand and their kingdom, and they're more concerned with the mission of Jesus, what Jesus has called them to do, the opportunities that Jesus has given them. They're about building Jesus' kingdom instead of their own kingdom. And then lastly, I think a Jesus-focused leader is part of a team. Instead of avoiding accountability, they welcome it. They submit to someone or to a group of leaders. And get this, they don't always get their way. If you're a person that always gets your way, you're probably in trouble. There's probably something that's off, or it's headed down not so good of a path. You know, there were 12 apostles. There wasn't one apostle. Peter might have been the chief among equals there, the first among equals, we might call him among the apostles. But Jesus put together a group of 12 guys to do this together. Peter's not alone. And in fact, on one occasion, we see where the Apostle Paul, who comes on the scene a little bit later, you got to read about this later in Galatians chapter 2. It's one of the craziest parts of Scripture, where Paul says that Peter screwed up and I publicly confronted him to his face, and then I wrote about it in the Bible so that you would see it 2,000 years later into history. Right? He says Peter stood condemned because he compromised the gospel later on in his ministry, and he wouldn't associate with certain Gentiles that have trusted in Jesus Christ for salvation because he feared the Jews. And I stood up in front of the assembly and I publicly condemned him to his face and confronted him. And you need somebody like that in your life that's willing to do that as a leader, right? This happens. Now, this is a reminder to us what happens between Paul and Peter, that no leader is perfect. That every leader struggles with these things and will mess up sometimes. But apparently Peter repented of all of that thanks to his willingness to be accountable and Paul's willingness to challenge him within this group of apostles. You know, I wonder if this is one of the major causes, or at least what's going on when celebrity pastors and big-time leaders fail, when they tank. I just wonder if the popularity and the influence and the power has grown, and at the same time, it used to be them and Jesus, or maybe Jesus and them, and they're looking to Jesus, and they're trusting Jesus. And then as the fame and the popularity goes, this relationship with Jesus just starts to take a backseat to their own brand, their own image, their own power, their own kingdom and influence. And as they begin to go like this, they isolate themselves from other leaders around them. They stop allowing people to speak into their lives. They think they're big time. They think they've figured it out. And all of those things are missing because they become isolated and enamored by the influence instead of staying in love with Jesus and building his kingdom. Now look, you can't control this. If you're listening to this and you're like, oh, I hate that and it's terrible, it is. And we should be sad when leaders fail. But you also have to recognize something. You have a role to pray for your leaders, to respect, to follow them, but you don't control ultimately their decisions. Each leader is responsible for the choices they make. But as you're deciding who to look up to, who to admire, these are the kinds of things to take note of, especially when it comes to spiritual leaders. Is there an alignment between Jesus' character and theirs, as best you can tell? Is there a humility that deflects attention? Do they seem to have a genuine love for and relationship with Jesus, and are they part of a team? Be careful who you look up to. And then lastly, be careful who you worship. I told you before, it's in all of us to admire people, and you're going to. You're going to look up to some people. You're going to have some heroes, some people that you look up to. But it's also in you to worship something. We're made for worship, and you will worship something. Now, for some people, they decided that object of their worship is going to be their self. I'm going to worship me, my needs, my wants, and my desires. And if that's the choice that you make or that you have made in your life, I got to tell you right now, you're going to be very disappointed because you cannot handle the weight of your own worship. You will not be able to sustain that for very long. And some people choose to worship themselves. Other people choose to worship things, movies, food, alcohol, possessions, sports. And then we maybe worship celebrities and musicians and athletes. We might even have a temptation to worship spiritual leaders. It's a bad move, and it will always come back to bite you. So here's my advice. Respect your leaders, but worship Jesus. Respect your leaders, but worship Jesus. You know, the Bible tells us we're supposed to respect our leaders. And you have people that you have to follow, and you need to respect them. We need to give them honor. As long as they're leading us with God's word and with what is true, not asking us to do immoral or unethical things, we need to follow. Now, you can push back on that sometimes, and you can discuss things for sure, but you have to respect them. God calls us to do this for sure. If they're asking us to be faithful and follow God, then we listen to that, right? The Bible tells us to honor our leaders. But man, never worship them. Never worship another human being. That's reserved for the only one that can handle the weight of your worship. It's reserved for the only one who is worthy of your worship. There's only one Savior. There's only one King. There's only one Lord over all who lived, died, and resurrected for you. And this is all about him. So we worship him. Now, one reason that this is so important for you and for me, for all of us, is that then when leaders do fail, when they mess up, when they tank, you will be very disappointed with that, but you won't be destroyed. You might be discouraged, you might be disillusioned, you're going to have to think through and process all of that, but your faith won't be destroyed because the center of your faith and your hope and life will still be standing. And he has always been there, and he has always been faithful, and he has always been good to you. Even if you don't always understand what he is doing, you can trust him because he is for you and he is with you. Your true hero will be there to hold you. You know, it's hard when leaders hurt other people. It's hard when leaders hurt us, when they're shown to be fake, or they abandon what they have taught all sorts of other people, what they say they believe. And if your faith is resting in a person, your faith might be destroyed. But when, as the old hymn says, when my hope is built on nothing less than Jesus' blood and righteousness, I dare not trust the sweetest frame, but wholly lean on Jesus' name. Well, that's an anchor that'll hold you. Your hope can be steadfast there. When Jesus is the one you worship, then you will be disappointed when leaders fail. You will be hurt. You may even be disillusioned for a while, but you can keep from becoming bitter and from abandoning your faith altogether because your hope was never ultimately in a person, it was in Jesus. On Christ, the solid rock I stand, all other ground is sinking sand. Now look, as I was putting this together, I couldn't help but think of those who have maybe left Christianity, left the church, or left believing even in God because of the failure of a leader that they really trusted in and looked up to. And I hate that, and it's so sad. I'm thinking of some specific people that I think are in this category because of the wounds that have been inflicted by a human being. And I got to tell you, if that's you, if by some miracle of God you happen to listen to this message or just listen to a little clip of this right now, I hope you would come to see and hear me. First of all, I'm sorry for that. I'm sorry for what has taken place. It's wrong. It's not right. It needs to be addressed. It needs to be dealt with. It's evil. But I hope that you would recognize that that's not Jesus. And Jesus still loves you, and he is for you, and he wants to receive you into his family, and he wants to change your life. He is your Savior. He is your King, and he will never, ever fail you. And I hope you would come back to him. Leaders will fail us at times. You know that. I imagine you're sitting here and we go through all this, you're like, yeah, I'm thinking back to my past, my history. For some of you, it's very recent that you feel the wounds of these kinds of things. And look, leaders, they will fail you. So do be careful who you look up to. And make sure that Jesus alone is the one that you worship and that your faith rests in. Would you pray with me?